On Apple Maps, you can't even see this place until you zoom in really far. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive of Zhokhov Island, which is in the far east of Russia in the very northern part of Yakutia, right up here in the Dalong Islands. If you zoom into this island in particular here, it has a very interesting past. There's an abandoned Soviet-era base, which housed over 28 people at one point, and evidence of the first people to selectively breed dogs who lived here over 9,000 years ago. Let's look into Zhokhov Island. So let's start with the more modern day history first, and then we'll look back at the ancient history. These islands were relatively unknown until the early 1900s, and in fact, Zhokhov Island wasn't even discovered until around 1914, when Boris Vilkitsky, on his 1914 voyage from Vladivostok, which is this eastern part of Russia right next to North Korea, all the way over here to Arkhangelsk. Now, on the way, he found these islands here and just briefly noted this island and went right by it. Actually, the island remained unnamed for a couple years. And then they named it after Peter Novopashiny, and they named it Novopashiny Island. Side note, I'm really sorry about my Russian pronunciations. I tried to look it up and doing my best. But Peter ended up switching sides and joining forces with Germany in the early 1920s to decipher codes of Soviet radio traffic. So shortly thereafter, they wanted to rename the island, and they named it after Alexei Zhokhov, who was apparently one of the first people to spot this island on the voyage and tragically died during the expedition. Alright, so we named this island Zhokhov Island, but really nothing happened for a while. Until 1955. The 50s were a year that the USSR opened a lot of Arctic stations on these remote Arctic islands, and in 1955, they opened one up here in Zhokhov Island. And this wasn't some small 3-man operation up here. No, they had up to 28 people working at a time up here, and took shifts every 2 years. The stated purpose of this place was to measure weather, seismic activity, and the movement of ice, but who knows what other things they did up here. It was actually a pretty good base for being up here. They had a nice ice airstrip, and a lot of the buildings were stocked full of food and had wardrobes, and they had plenty of fuel to last them. In fact, when you zoom in, sometimes you can see remnants of what appears to be barrels or other things, and that's how they transported a lot of fuel. But anyways, work went on this place until pretty much the collapse of the Soviet Union, when a lot of these bases ended up shutting down, and it was the same for this one. In 1993, this base shut down. That wasn't the end of the history of Zhokhov Island though. In the late 1990s, archaeologists came up here and started doing a lot of scientific expeditions, and they found a lot of interesting stuff. I'll get back to that in 1 second, but in 2014, Russia ended up putting an automatic weather station up here, and it doesn't appear that the base is permanently manned by anyone anymore. But anyways, what was the thing in the late 90s that caused swarms of archaeologists and scientists to come up to this remote Russian island in basically the middle of nowhere? Well, when they started digging up stuff, they started to realize something. Ancient humans actually lived way up here, over 9,000 years ago. Now, this discovery was wild because it's the farthest north we knew of any humans to be around that time. And we didn't just find evidence of humans, we found evidence of a lot of other stuff that they did. First of all, how did humans even get up here in this remote area? Well, around that time, 10,000 years ago, sea levels used to actually be a bit lower due to most of the water being frozen up in glaciers during the Ice Age. And around that time, there also was a land bridge between the eastern part of Siberia and modern-day Alaska that humans around that time crossed into, which led to the migration of lots of people throughout the Americas. Going back to Zhokhov Island, they found lots of tools and weapons, and some of the tools are pretty unique. They found ivory pickaxes.
So it's very clear this is a very heavy pick out of ivory.
They found tools made out of bones and antlers, and the interesting thing is, they found sleds. Now, these sleds weren't just used for recreation, these were actually used for travel, but who pulled the sleds? Back then there wasn't domesticated horses or other animals that could just pull them around. But what they discovered was Zhokhov Island was likely the first site where humans started to domesticate dogs. Now, scientists had uncovered a lot of dog skulls up here, and these were different than the wolves around there. The ratio of the nose and the skulls were different, and there was enough evidence to say that people did selectively breed them to be smaller to prevent overheating so that the dogs could help them out and pull them around on sleds. They also seemed to selectively breed dogs so that they could help hunt polar bears. They even found one dog that was dated 9,500 years ago that they named Zhokhov after the island. This is one of the oldest dogs in the world, for which they have the complete genome for, and It shares a lot of DNA with the modern day Siberian husky and Greenland sled dog. It's hard to tell how intentional they were with the breeding of the dogs, if they picked two dogs with the characteristics that they wanted and bred them, or if they just picked the best puppies out of the litter to use for their purposes. They needed these dogs to pull them all around on sleds because they did a lot of trading down here with the rest of Siberia. They found a lot of obsidian tools up on Zhokhov Island, which you cannot find any obsidian around here, and that obsidian likely came from all the way over here, from Lake Krasna. And they probably participated in some extremely long-distance trading with the people down in Siberia. They also likely got a lot of their wood from driftwood, as there's no trees up on this island, as it's at 76 degrees north. That kind of puts this island on par with Devon Island in Canada, which already looks like Mars anyway. But hopefully over time, even more discoveries come out of this island. And on YouTube, there's this really good documentary from the early 2000s about archaeologists who are living up here. It's like half in Russian and half in English, but the visuals are really cool and you can kind of get an idea of what it's like on the island. So I linked that down in the description. Anyways, thanks for watching and let me know what islands I should cover next.